Welcome to the live stream of this series of 4 lectures on Initiation and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Tonight, part 1. This lecture consists of 3 parts of about 25 minutes, and after each part there will be a break during which you can ask questions via the chat or via email. The questions will be answered as much as possible after the break. The lecture will end with an invocation that is a call to our higher nature. This lecture consists of the following 3 parts: Initiation and the culture of ancient Egypt, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a first introduction, and the last part is about initiation and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. In the first part, we will give an explanation of the approach of this study, of the meaning of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and we will explain what initiation exactly is. And we'll give some more background information on the culture of ancient Egypt. So today we start with the lectures on the Initiation and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is the oldest cartoon in the world. For quite some time, at least in the last century, several researchers like Egyptologists Was Budge and Maspero have concluded that in all major religions and philosophies of the world, a common core can be found. The common core is known by many names, such as ancient wisdom, esoteric philosophy, or Teosofia, but the name actually doesn't really matter. The Teosofia is based on 3 propositions, namely the first, the boundlessness of life and consciousness. Everything in the cosmos is alive. Second, cyclicity. All life manifests cyclically, and in between are rest periods, like for instance death. And the third is the joint growth of all beings based on free will. And at all levels there is an analogy in the pattern, as above, so below. What can the Teosofia mean for deepening the understanding of the culture of ancient Egypt? No real conclusive system has yet been discovered by Egyptologists in the ancient Egyptian religion, in the richness of the many ancient gods and the stories about them. Take for example the fact that the mythological stories about the creation of the cosmos and man in ancient Egypt were already very different for each individual city. Our premise is that the universal ideas of the Teosofia can also be found in the religion of ancient Egypt, although perhaps somewhat fragmentarily. And that's one of the reasons for this series of lectures. Knowledge of the processes of life and death and initiation into the processes of life and death are a common thought in both Teosofia and the religion of ancient Egypt. Important, the processes of initiation are about the accelerated development of consciousness, as any human being could go through at any time. Main character in the Egyptian Book of the Dead is not just a person from ancient Egypt, but could be any human being like ourselves at some point in the future, and that brings it much closer to us. It is an invitation to everyone who is seriously interested in this culture to take notice of the results of this study. In our opinion, it can contribute to more understanding of the culture of ancient Egypt. The purpose of this study is to study the relationship between the knowledge of initiation and the text of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Therefore, study of the relation between the following two topics: the vision of life and death and related ideas about the processes of initiation according to the Teosofia, and the plates and texts of the Egyptian Book of the Dead as prepared by various Egyptologists in modern languages as a translation of the hieroglyphs using the so-called Rosetta Stone. The name hieroglyphs, by the way, already indicates something. Hieros means sacred language, and glypho means I engrave. So the Egyptian characters were sacred, like in India the Devanagari was the language of the gods. So we will present everything as a study regarding the hypothesis that the knowledge of initiation from the Teosofia can partly still be well recognized in the text of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Why partly? Well, there are a number of reasons for this. Great Egyptologists like the 19th century Egyptologist Maspero already indicated that the available material and the historical data are not complete and very often not understandable. Wallace Budge, the curator of the British Museum of Egypt and Assyria in the late 19th and the early 20th century, already concluded that the most complete version of the papyrus, called the Book of Ani, contains less than 50% of all the original chapters. Also, modern Egyptologists find that some texts are difficult to translate and or understand. There are indications in the Teosofia that the generation of knowledge about initiation in ancient Egypt began long ago and continued to increase, making recognition in the text more difficult. Moreover, we know that in the past, sometimes esoteric texts in different traditions were brought out in which something was changed on purpose. For instance, omitted or changed in order to obscure things. For example, in Hinduism, the Brahmins published the Upanishads in a very abbreviated form, leaving out the most important keys. And we seriously consider that something similar could be the case with the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Therefore, our study is aimed to examine, with the texts that are still available, to what extent a clear relationship can be established between the knowledge of initiation and the texts and images in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And we hope by this approach to provide more insight and a more coherent picture. Now, what exactly is initiation? Initiation means the start of a new development for a beginner. And this beginner is indicated with the name neophyte, initiant, or initiate. And this new development entails, in the first stage, a process of purification. That is the characteristic of the first three initiations. The next stages are based on gaining first-hand experience and knowledge of planes of existence older than our material earth. In all great cultures, there have been stories known about heroes and sages who were successful in the process of initiation. Those stories roughly read as follows. First, there were 7 or 12 trials of initiation, as symbolized, for instance, by the 12 works of Hercules. Second, that for the initiate applies that the day of his actual birth is the day on which the initiate is born spiritually, as a twice born, a dvija, as they say in the East. And third, the ordeals and esoteric meaning of the so-called initiation rites correspond to each other. The stories in each case are a personification of the sufferings, triumphs, and miracles of an initiate before and after his initiation. The stories of all those heroes and sages are very similar. For instance, the legends of the lives of Krishna, Hercules, Pythagoras, Buddha, and Jesus show that are all presented as a divinely begotten Savior, a title only granted to gods, great kings, and heroes. And the similarities are as follows. All are sought at some point and threatened with death by an opposing power, a symbol of the world of matter and illusion. King Kamsa in case of Krishna, King Herod in case of Jesus, or King Mara, the evil force in the case of Gautama the Buddha. They are all tempted and persecuted, and finally, it is said, they are killed at the end of the rite of initiation. That means in their physical personality, from which they are supposed to be forever redeemed after the spiritual resurrection or birth. Thereafter, they all descend into a sphere of matter and temptation, the underworld, whence they return and are glorified, becoming gods. The similarity is thus not in the details of their daily lives, but in the inner state of their consciousness, and in the main events of their lives as spiritual teachers. What is the purpose of initiation? And especially of the higher initiation. That is to test whether the initiate has the required inner qualities. This means to be, under extreme circumstances, the one who he seems to be. That is a pure, wise, and compassionate human being. To accelerate the development of one's own divine nature and thus become into contact with other higher evolved beings. See, for instance, in the New Testament, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verse 8, in which Jesus says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Meaning, they will be one with the divine in themselves. In this way, they will be better able to become a teacher for their fellow man. And that is the motive of the initiate to go through the process of initiation. So, the process of initiation essentially consists of 1. Preparations, the initiations of the first, second and third degree, primarily include building up a philosophy of life through the study of esoteric teachings on the processes and the structure in nature and the origin and destiny of all living beings. Aspiration, constant striving to grow spiritually and intellectually, and leading the life. That means practical discipline. Assuming reincarnation, we have and need multiple lives for this. Second, gaining first-hand practical experience from the fourth initiation onwards. In the fourth and higher initiation, gaining first-hand practical experience through experiencing the ideas from the esoteric teachings yourself. In this process, he is guided by a teacher. The initiant goes to other planes or spheres of existence in the cosmos. Higher planes for inspiration to return as a teacher, and lower planes to inspire and assist sentient beings over there. According to Theosophy, the process of initiation is a universal process throughout the cosmos. A teacher in the form of a so-called avatara, a divine being, descends into our world to bring the spiritual light here, like Jesus, Krishna, Sankaracharya, etc. did. This is especially in periods of spiritual poverty, to speak with Plato. The initiate descends from our world to a lower region of the cosmos to bring the spiritual light there. The processes of initiation always have been known in many cultures, for instance in ancient India, in ancient Egypt, Greece, and among the Romans. They were practiced in the so-called mystery schools, accessible only to those who were inwardly sufficiently ethically, morally developed. The nature of the initiation processes, being a series of tests, demands a high standard of the initiate. Required characteristics are a heart and soul of steel, an iron determination, be brave and righteous, and at the same time gentle, kind, modest, and above all compassion. Having banished every human passion that leads to evil. Forgiving, ignoring and forgiving personal injustice. In short, requirements are: one must be worthy, fit and ready to go the path of initiation to maximize the chance of success. In ancient Egypt, there were also those mystery schools, for instance in Memphis, Thebes, Sais, and Heliopolis. Esoteric literature indicates that among pharaohs, especially the ones of the first dynasties, were also initiated kings, called sons of the sun. Hence, they were called king of Lower Egypt, not king of the Nile Delta, but of the earthly kingdom of Egypt, and king of Upper Egypt, not upstream of the river Nile, but the spiritual Egypt. And ancient Egypt had a long tradition of mystery schools with processes of initiation. In addition to the pharaohs, initiate also included, for instance, Moses, Pythagoras, Plato, and many others. So, in conclusion, initiation has been known in all major cultures, also in Egypt. Now, what is the background of the culture of ancient Egypt? Culture of ancient Egypt goes all the way back to the ancient continent of Atlantis, a continent which, according to theosophical sources, did indeed exist and sunk at the location of the present Atlantic Ocean. There have been 3 waves of immigration to Egypt. First, the wave from Atlantis to the Abyssinian plateau of Egypt from before the Nile Delta, several hundred thousands of years ago. The second immigration was from Poseidonis, one of the last major islands of Atlantis, some 80,000 to over 100,000 years ago. And the third immigration wave came from southern India, called the Eastern Ethiopians, the Schizohor, or sons of Horus, some 8,000 to 9,000 years or more ago. This group intermingled with the Atlantic Egyptians and became the Egyptians of the written history with several dynasties of pharaohs. From at least well over 3000 BC to 300 BC, Egypt had a very high profile in the world because it possessed very ancient knowledge and wisdom. Mythologies tell of dynasties of divine kings and mystery schools, such as of Thebes, Memphis, Heliopolis, Sais, Abydos, Luxor and Karnak, in which the greatest of the sacred mysteries were kept. All esoteric knowledge from the Middle East and India was known in those mystery schools regarding the spiritual side of life. In the lesser mysteries, such as in the myths, in the pyramid texts, in the sarcophagus texts, and in the so-called books of the dead, and in the greater mysteries, the knowledge of the process of initiation. But also consider the knowledge of the ancient Egyptians of hydraulic engineering, mathematics, physics, astronomy, alchemy, medicine, etc. Important classical Greek thinkers, such as Pythagoras and Plato, went to Egypt for their education. Still, the Egyptians were an ordinary people, but they were a very religious people with the mystery schools, increasingly degenerated. Let's have a first acquaintance with the culture of ancient Egypt in the form of a few basic ideas which, according to theosophical sources, were known in the mystery schools. First, consciousness as a starting point and also the idea of the cyclicity of life. According to the ancient Egyptians, the soul is immortal and appears and disappears with the so-called solar boat of the god Ra. In the next picture you will see this solar boat and circles. The soul comes from the sphere called the Duat, the sphere of the cause of life. According to the Egyptians, the soul joins the living during the day and returns to the Duat every night. This idea expresses the cyclicity of life, the idea of reincarnation. The idea of reincarnation is also seen in the Egyptian symbol of the dung beetle or scarab called Khepera, derived from the verb kopron, which means to become or to rebuild. Indeed, for the Egyptian, it was initially a mystery that a new beetle suddenly emerged from a dung ball. But please note that the reincarnation idea was kept secret in the mystery schools. Another idea was that man is a composite being. Ancient Egyptians assumed, like other cultures, that man is a composite being with a consciousness and a vehicle side, and more specifically consists of 7 principles. The highest principle was the divine. The Indians called this Atman, the Egyptians called it the inner Osiris. The ancient Egyptians knew that the lower principles disintegrate after death. But there are also eternal principles in man, symbolizing among others by the soul bird, the divine swallow, which is a symbol for the higher manas, the higher mind, and the serpent of fire, a symbol for Atman Buddhi. In the literature, both theosophical and the literature of the Egyptologists, you will find various 7-fold divisions. And as an illustration, I show one of them to you. You see 3 columns. The left column states the Sanskrit words of the Teosofia, and you see in the middle column the meaning of these principles. From bottom to top, it is the body principle, the astral principle, the vital principle, the desire principle, the mind, the spiritual principle, and the divine principle. And you see in the right column the Egyptian words for it, one of the words that you can find in the literature. And so you see Kat for the body, Ka or Kaba for the astral body, then another Ka for vitality, the Ko, Ak, Ba, Sa, and Osiris. And actually, during our lectures of the Book of the Dead, we will mainly see the Ka being the lower astral vehicle, and the Ba being the higher mind, and Osiris, the inner Osiris, Atman, will appear in our lectures, but for the rest we will not really deal with all those various parts of composite man as the Egyptians used them. The third basic idea was the processes of growth and transformation of man, which is related to the process of initiation. Ancient Egyptians taught the development of the highest virtues in oneself. Through inner growth, it is possible to transform yourself, as it were, such that you activate the latent divine in yourself, your inner Osiris, through gradual growth in many incarnations, or by accelerated growth through the process of initiation. In various Egyptian papyruses, the cosmogony, as known in the Teosofia, can be found in parts, but only fragmentarily in isolated phrases. And we will see that in the coming lectures, that it really is these isolated phrases that give you a clue that they were knowledgeable about the core teachings of the Teosofia. We'll see that later on. The Egyptian religion consisted of 2 types. First, the ceremonies of the majority of the people, the exoteric side, and second, the religion of the heart and intuition, the religion of the initiation chambers, of the mystery schools. It is related to the accelerated ennoblement of consciousness. Esoteric teachings were preserved and protected in the mystery schools, often attached to the larger temples in the country. Those schools were known since the days of Pharaoh Menes, of the first dynasty of pharaohs, 3100 BC. Why preserved and protected? To prevent misuse of knowledge and wisdom. It is worth mentioning that even before the first dynasty, knowledge in mystery schools was no longer completely pure. And after it further degenerated, also due to, for instance, the early death of the hierophants, that is the leaders of those schools. Now, what kind of religion did ancient Egypt have? The religious ideas of ancient Egyptians were very complex. They were hidden in many allegories and symbols. And you have always, when you study these allegories and these mythological stories, you have always to be alert of the context that you are reading those stories in order to figure out what actually the meaning behind it is. Another thing is that per city, sometimes very different gods were playing a central role in the religion. The forces in nature were personified to make them manageable for the people in this era. And Egyptologists of the 19th century, such as Maspero, argued that in the course of the hundreds of years, religious visions were also constantly changing significantly, and that there is no such thing as one Egyptian religion. There seems to be many contradictions. In part, this was also because temples had a different focus in terms of knowledge. Sometimes they were focused on the cosmos, on the cosmogony, others on the solar system, and others on Earth or humanity. But also differences in emphasis on science, philosophy, or religion. Our study is based primarily on the hieroglyphic translations of the Egyptologists of the last 150 years, such as Wallace Birch and Faulkner in the 20th century, and their descriptions give a possible outline of the main names of Egyptian gods in order of origin, and that gives a following picture, although there are more of these pictures again. So this is a picture of the many pictures, and I will go through it rather quickly because it is not the main theme of our lectures, but just to give you some background information. We see at the top the god Tem or Atum, the highest self-created god, and in the city of Memphis they had the god Ptah on this same position. In Isis Unveiled, Madame Blavatsky calls the god Ptah the demiurge. That is the name for the collective of the creators, plural, of the world, who are in the Bible called the Elohim. And through the process called emanation, our world was formed. Then we see a lower level, because when we speak about emanation, this process of emanation resulting in manifestation goes in different steps downwards to even more material world. So the second step in this Genesis process is the step from the cosmos to the solar system, and there we have on top the sun god Ra, born of Tem and Nun, and one of the other names of Ra is Khepera. We have the gods Shu, Tefnut, Kep and Nut, born from Ra and Nun. And then we have a third Genesis level. We have Osiris, god of the underworld and also the divine nature of man. And we have Isis, the sister and wife of Osiris, and the mother of Horus. The Greek philosopher Plutarch, around 120 AC, records the following inscription from the portico of the temple of Isis at Sais. The text reads as follows: Isis am I am all that was, that is, and that shall be, and no one of mortals has ever lifted my veil. And the great Neoplatonist Proclus, writing in Athens nearly 400 years later, mentions another sentence which was part of this inscription, which continues now. And the fruit that I, Isis, brought forth became the sun. This may give you something to think about. Then we have the god Set, the brother and murderer of Osiris, also often called Typhon, and the husband of Nephthys. Nephthys is the sister of Isis and the mother of Anubis. Then we get the fourth phase of Genesis. And then we get Horus, the falcon god, the son of the god Osiris. He symbolizes the higher thinking of man and the heart, the higher human consciousness, the inner Buddha or the inner Christ. He is the opponent of Set, the brother of Osiris, and we will see that in the coming lecture, what is happening with those guys. Then we have Anubis, the god of oblivion, and associated with Osiris, the guide of the initiates. Not in the schedule, but worth mentioning, is the god of wisdom Thoth, symbol of the divine intelligence, and the goddess Ma'at, the daughter of Ra and the wife of Thoth. Ma'at means justice and harmony. I have explained to you these different levels of existence and of Genesis, but we will have difficulties to see those different phases of Genesis back in the Book of the Dead. It is difficult to distinguish that, so don't expect that we will see really details of that, but this was necessary to give you some background about the gods of ancient Egypt. For ancient Egypt, Osiris was the most famous god. He was pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt in the mythological stories. He taught the people to worship the gods, raise livestock, and formulated laws. His brother Set, filled with jealousy, murdered his brother. Isis, his distraught wife, searched for and eventually found the body of Osiris. But Set stole the body, tore it into 14 pieces, and scattered it throughout Egypt. Isis collected the parts again and restored Osiris' body. Then Osiris was resurrected and became the ruler of the underworld, Amenti. And finally, Horus, his son, defeated Set. Osiris' death and resurrection symbolize the process of initiation. More about that in a moment. The Osiris-Isis cult, by the way, according to the Teosofia, goes back more than 75,000 years and was thus very old by then. According to Egyptologists such as Maspero and Massi, ideas often changed in the esoteric religion of Egypt. But according to Madame Blavatsky, this is not true of some of the most important teachings that did survive, such as two examples. The doctrine of reincarnation, which was only known within the walls of the mystery schools, but also the doctrine of the spheres, about the sun and its relations with the 7 sacred planets called the 7 luminous ones, together forming the unity of the solar system. In addition, the idea of the boundlessness of life, as we can see that in the first proposition of the secret doctrine, was also known to the ancient Egyptians. This is evidenced by the 1,000-year-old papyrus of Dordinet, now in the British Museum, containing the following sentence in one of the hymns. The gods adore thee, they greet thee, O the one dark truth. So the one dark truth was the expression of the Egyptians for the boundless. It was at least known within the Egyptian temple walls at the time. Madame Blavatsky states that this thought is the source of the text in the Bible, among others, in Corinthians 3, verse 16. Know you not that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God is in you? In Egyptian mythology, we do not find this thought, however, and it is explainable since many mythologies began only with Genesis of the stages of the universe that were already close to the material world. So, to sum it up, important ideas of the Teosofia were always preserved in ancient Egypt. We are now ready for the first break of 3 minutes, and please send your questions via the chat or via email, and we will be back in 3 minutes from now.
Well, Joop, we have some questions by mail and in the chat.
Yeah.
And the first question is, you specially mentioned that it was about higher initiation. What do lower initiations stand for?
Yeah, the lower initiation are what the Greek called the catharsis. That is a process of purification, and it can take many lives. It has 3 stages, these lower initiations. And it is working on yourself. First, build up a philosophy of life, and especially the esoteric teachings. Lead the life, become disciplined, and build up aspiration to spiritual aspirations to become a more pure and noble person. That is actually what the lower initiations are about. Okay. And there are also trainings, let's say, just like a pilot of an aeroplane now is trained in a simulator. This was also the case with the ancient Egyptians. They had caves and subterranean spaces where people were tested how they could control themselves in extreme conditions and stay cool. And remain calm under extreme conditions. So they were trained before they went to the higher initiations.
Yeah, it sounds like basic training before you can go to the real world.
Yeah, exactly, but it took many lives most of the time.
Thank you. I'll go to the next question. Could you explain the Netars and how they relate to the oneness and God?
The what then?
Netars, N-E-T.
Oh, Neter, yeah.
Yeah.
Neter, yeah. The Neter is a name for all the gods, but in fact, I said that actually all the forces in nature, which were called the neter, they personified all these natural forces, and they called them neter, and they called them gods, but they are all aspects of the forces in nature. And we will see that next week when we have the first section of the different picture or vignettes in the Book of the Dead, and you will see, for instance, 12 gods in one of the first slides, and they represent, in fact, the 12 forces of the signs of the zodiac, and so they are an example of the forces in the cosmos, and they are personified by 12 gods.
So it's a term for collection of...
Yeah.
Here someone asks that in Genesis, in the Bible, as the question, the person who asks the question understands it, starts with the word.
Yeah.
And where is that situation located in the diagram you showed?
Yeah.
In the God of Egypt?
Yeah. Well, if you look at the diagram I showed with the 4 levels or 4 planes of existence, that part of Genesis, the start of the manifested world, you should place that in the first level, so the top level, with the god Tem or the god Ptah, because there the word, the speaking out of the manifestation is actually another way of expressing the idea of emanation. You can look at it in the following way. If we see the consciousness part of the cosmos as being the cosmic mind, where the idea of the cosmos is already present, then at the moment that the ideas are spoken out by the word, that is actually the first manifestation or the start of the manifested worlds. And it is actually not such a complex idea. I did preparations to give those lectures on ancient Egypt to tell you something about it. And until I start speaking to you, it was maybe a blank for you, unless you have studied it yourself. But by telling you what I have studied, I am manifesting actually some of the esoteric knowledge about the ancient culture of ancient Egypt. And that is something that happened also in the beginning of the manifestation. There was in the cosmic mind a lot of ideas about the manifested world, but then it had to be spoken out to make it happen, to come into being.
Thank you, that's a great answer. And then I've got a final question, but the person who asks the question doesn't know whether it's too long to answer, but he would be very interested to hear about the influence of Egyptian mystery schools on ancient Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
And particularly Plato's.
Particularly Plato. Well, I mentioned already that both Pythagoras, who was before Plato, and Plato himself, went to Egypt, to the mystery schools, to study for many years the philosophies of the ancient Egyptians. And I'm not so, I have read what especially Pythagoras and Plato obtained from Egypt, because they studied also other traditions. But for instance, Pythagoras obviously gained a lot of knowledge about everything that has to do with mathematics and music. Plato especially thinks about ideas about reincarnation, but also about how to rule a country. Especially the mystery school of Sais was famous for its insights how to govern a country, and that is probably what Plato studied there as one of the things I can mention, because obviously he wrote in his dialogues the Republic, the states, and that is something that had its source in ancient Egypt.
Well, thank you. These were the questions for now.
Okay, then we will continue with our second block, which is a little bit shorter.